Hey everyone, it's Lauren here. Welcome back to my YouTube channel, and today we are here to talk about JJK, Jujutsu Kaisen, and good versus evil. Before we get into that, if you have not yet, I do have other JJK videos out. I've made a good amount of them actually, which I don't really know how that happened. But yeah, go ahead and check them out. I'd also be a fool not to mention what's going on at MAPPA right now with JJK. I wish the best for the animators, everybody else in the creative team, and I hope you get the pay, time off, and grace that you deserve, because it's crazy. Like, as creatives, you deserve what you need in order to create, and we appreciate everything that you've done. So please, shout out to those creators. Anyways, back to JJK and good versus evil. The fight that really brought this forefront into my mind was the fight between Itadori, Yuji, and Choso. Itadori, he fought Choso's little brothers earlier on in the series. Him and Nomura tag team these motherfuckers. They are dead. Yuji felt a sense of guilt about it ever since, but then he eventually ends up facing their older brother's Choso, and he is essentially at Shibuya in order to get his revenge on Itadori for killing his younger brothers. And in that scene, despite Itadori being the most morally correct, or at least morally aligned hero within the series, we also see that he himself is a villain. It's not just the kind of villain that lives inside him as 1,000 years old and, you know, is capable of mass world destruction. Sukuna. He also is a villain in his own right because he did kill the little brothers of the enemy he is facing. And that situation was interesting because despite Itadori usually being this sunshine character in this really dark Jujutsu sorcerer world, he's also done some terrible things out of necessity, but he has done some terrible things. And it's an interesting switch because he is the protagonist, but in the situation, if you looked at it from an objective point of view, Choso is fighting to avenge his younger brothers, and Itadori is fighting in order to, I guess, like, save Shibuya, but he is fighting the person whose brothers he did kill. So if you looked at it from a certain point of view, you can say that Itadori is the villain and Choso is the protagonist. And it's just really interesting to see those roles be flipped. You don't really see it much in a lot of traditional old shonen anime. So for example, like, you could mention a big three, but like what I would probably mention, best example is My Hero Academia. It was a contender for being one of the big three of our generation. In terms of My Hero Academia, there is this borderline, maybe utopic world that is supposed to be held up, and then there are these villains that are trying to topple it because of some societal issue, but they're saying the societal issue is not enough in order to topple the whole society. Academia follows that trope to a T, right? So they are the society maintainers. They fight in order to win and to save, and they're doing it in order to maintain societal order and keep people happy and see smiles on people's faces. It's very much like not a morally complicated ground to fight on. Jujutsu Kaisen is different in the sense that, like, they are fighting to save people. Like, the larger goal of Jujutsu society is to save humankind from the curses that they created, right? It's in order to keep the balance, the order between curses and human beings the same and save lives while doing so. But that's not really the main reason that they fight. Like, they're kind of forced into these roles in order to fight, and have to find specific reasons in order to stay alive, in order to keep doing the job, which is not true for a lot of, like, classic shonen anime.
不快な仕事だ。ある程度のイカれ具合と高いモチベーションは不可欠だ。それを他人に言われたから笑わせるな。
And I would say, like, this style of, like, the darker, like, society possibly being fucked up standard has been seen in a lot of modern anime. For example, you can say Attack on Titan, really big example of that. Like, the Survey Corps, they're doing it for, like, a moral purpose, but they kind of have no choice because it's either, like, they fight the Titans, also, like, they stay in their little cage and possibly just die slow generational deaths, which is freaking insane. So Attack on Titan is a big example of it. There's 86, which if you have not heard of it, I would highly check it out. It's kind of similar, I guess, to the themes of Attack on Titan. There's also Chainsaw Man, Hell's Paradise, hell, there's even Zom 100 and Oshinoko. They all show, like, that there are inherent problems within the systems that they're working in, and are kind of not for essentially just, like, maintaining societal order, but working for their own personal gain. And I think it reflects kind of like what's going on in society a little bit. A lot of us are more socially aware, more economically aware. We are aware of how society is screwing us over. And therefore, anime and also of other genres just are happening to comment on it a bit more in their own ways. And we can relate to it a lot more too, because a lot of us are also, like, working within the circumstances that are given to us, hoping that the system may change. Or at least that's me. Maybe I should not be speaking we, like French. So yeah, like, Jujutsu Kaisen definitely reflects that. Like, they are essentially like these soldiers that are being forced against the wall, because unlike other shows, like, for example, My Hero Academia, I'm going to keep on using it because I feel like it's just the classic hero example. They didn't choose that profession. It's not something they necessarily wanted, but it's something that only a select few are capable of being able to do the job, and therefore a lot of them kind of are just forced to do the job, especially since they are born into families which kind of, like, groom them into doing the jobs. Like, they don't really get a choice. They can't just be like, oh, you know, I want to be, like, an accountant. Nanami. He's like, you know what? both of these jobs are asked, but at least one of them feels more morally correct. So I'm gonna do it, but it's only because I'm one of the few people able to do it. That's not necessarily a choice. They don't really get a choice in the matter, and that kind of leads to a lot of the jadedness that goes into it. They're like soldiers that have to go to war because, well, they're the few people that are able to. And also, I like to compare them kind of to garbage men, essentially. Like, they do this job that they don't really get appreciation for because no one really knows that curses exist other than them. They're the only people able to see it. And yeah, they kind of just get rid of the mucky, disgusting stuff that no one is willing to see that we created. So yeah, the Jujutsu Kaisen, if I were to make it into the most mediocre way possible, they're basically like the curse cleanup crew. They are the trash men. They're the people that take care of the shit that we do not even want to look at or believe exists. So it's awful for them. They do that, and that kind of disrupts that shonen trope right there. And I guess that does bring into mind, like, what is it that makes the villain so interesting? What is it that makes the hero so interesting? Going on to the villains, like, it's kind of clear what makes them very interesting. They all have like super interesting powers. Their power scaling is super dope. Like, they're overly powered, one might argue. But the biggest thing for them is the fact that they are, well, like this. Overhead bomb! They're pretty happy-go-lucky. Like, you can't really look at them and be like, yeah, that's an evil motherfucker right there. The only thing that gives that away really is the fact that they don't look human. But aside from that, a lot of the time they treat each other like family. They abide by a certain moral code. Most of them do. There are two inexcusable pieces of shit that probably don't deserve any grace whatsoever. But aside from that, they have very human characteristics. They show care for one another, they fight for one another, and they're constantly doing these mundane things on the side that humanizes their characters despite them not being human. It makes it really hard to hate these characters. Granted, I wouldn't say that's necessarily an exception. So when people talk about the good and evil and JJK and villains versus heroes, I wouldn't necessarily say the villains are the ones that make the story very, very interesting, while that tends to be the case. I think for villains, it is interesting to see, for example, Sukuna be so unapologetically evil, for sure. But in terms of like them kind of having like these human origins, it's not necessarily something new in anime or in storytelling in general. The thing that makes their dynamic so interesting is the fact that we can see that they have very clear emotions. However, the heroes themselves like make what happens to the villains seems all the more depressing, grotesque, immoral, some might say. For example, the Itadori and Choso situation. Like, if someone killed my siblings, I completely understand Choso, and we can all somewhat understand the motives of the villains. Like, they kind of just want to exist in peace, exist in a world where they're not told that they shouldn't exist. Like, we get it to a certain extent. Do we want to die because of it? No. Which leads to these two different ideologies coming to a head, but we can get it. We understand it. Them being human isn't necessarily an exception, though it does really help in building interesting dynamic in the story. It is the heroes themselves, because it's clear that all of them do not want to freaking be there, man. They're all doing this job that they are kind of like morally or like physically obligated to do because there's no one else that can do it. They're constantly living in a world in which child soldiers are being forced to be a thing. They constantly have to worry about like whether or not they'll actually make it back in time, if they'll see their friends again. Like, there's just a lot that they have to do as a result of this job. And so like we see them not necessarily as happy-go-lucky. They had more happy moments, honestly, in like season 1. The villains got a lot more levity and a lot more filled out dynamics in season 2. But in season 1, we got a lot more of like the heroes being lighthearted. And that's because we're seeing the world mostly through the eyes of the first years who are just meeting each other, who are just going on their first couple of missions. But aside from that, very, very, very depressing folks. And I think what it comes down to is the fact that like they kind of find joy in their jobs of taking out these curses, which is not a normal thing. Even Deku, when he fights Shigaraki, he still like somewhat feels bad for him to a certain extent. Again, I'm bringing up My Hero Academia because this is the most typical shonen, like, squeaky clean hero example that I could come up with. When he fights Shigaraki, he still sees like a kind of human in him, whereas when Jujutsu sorcerers fight, they refuse to see the humanness of the villains. And it's a really interesting dynamic because we as the audience, we can see it. Gege clearly wants us to see that the villains are human in a way. However, that's not really enough to make the heroes willing to see it. And it's because they only have so much mental capacity to care for these things that they're forced to exercise. For example, like obviously like when Itadori and Nobara killed those two cursed human hybrids, they were talking about what essentially was murder and them killing people for kind of like the first time, or at least like early enough of a time in order for it to have a mark on them. And Nobara said that she only had so many seats available within her heart to have people sit down in. Therefore, she can't care too much about like what happens to the things that she has to exercise. She's just gonna do the job, go home, be happy that she's alive.
私の人生の席っていうか、そこに座ってない人間に 私の心をどうこうされたくないのよね。冷たい？
Not only do they not afford themselves to care too much about the curses that which they're exercising, they also don't afford themselves to care that much about the people that they're saving. Because granted, in the JJK world, it's not guaranteed that everyone that you save is going to live at all. It's not guaranteed that they'll get out unmaimed. So the fact that like they have to quantify like what matters most in a mission, and sometimes that means that everybody has to die. Exhibit A, Gojo. Like he tried to give as minimal casualties as possible, but he did not let the killing of certain citizens like lead to him not doing his job. Like he continued to do his job regardless, and he did it smiling. And it's mainly because of the fact that Jujutsu sorcerers, they're not entirely sane. And they also don't have much wiggle room to do much outside of being the heroes that they are. So whatever chance they have to goof off, to let off that steam, they'll let it out. And they tend to do it in their jobs. There have been multiple scenes throughout the series. For example, Gojo, for example, he literally walked up to, I forgot her name, like the freaking like curse spirit of nature. He walked up to her and literally vaporized her just by like walking and laughing while he did it, bro. The way he treated Jogo, bro. You don't really see heroes take joy all that much in like what they do. Like even if they defeat the villain, it's like this stoic victory. Like they refuse to find like too much joy in what they do. They feel a sense of guilt. But JJK just refused to feel that. Like for example, Nobara, when they killed them motherfuckers, she was smiling, giggling, cackling. Like she was laughing, clowning these people right in their faces. That shit was crazy. Yuta as well, like he kind of got to a point where he treated things in like a darker manner. We could see that darkness within him within the JJK Zero movie. And that was also really interesting to witness. We see it with Megami when he first did his domain expansion. They all lose it at some point. Even Maki, like we don't really see her showing any remorse whatsoever when fighting these people. They only really show like fear or an intense joy in fighting victory. And it's mainly just because, again, they don't really have the room in their hearts to care that much because they're so worried about being alive. They're so worried about like people that they care about that they can't really afford to care about the villain. I'd be like, oh, no worries, we'll figure it out together, as can so often happen in anime. I've heard Naruto is like notorious for that. Yeah, so it's not necessarily the villains that stand out, essentially, is what I wanted to say. Because when it comes to like good versus evil, people always talk about how like the villains, like they love them or they respected their character. But we can only really respect the humanness of the villains because of the lack of humaneness within the heroes themselves. And the lack of humaneness comes from the fact that they can't really afford to care in their line of work because it's either kill or be killed. And the curse is like, they don't care regardless. They might reincarnate in another life, yada, yada, yada. But the humans, that's like their one chance. They have other shit they have to do. They're not necessarily just fighting for the good of mankind either. They have to find their other reasons. Like some of them, it's like for money. For others, it's to give people proper deaths. For some, it's also to change their personal life circumstances. They're all fighting for something other than just the greater good, because if they were just fighting for the greater good, they would lose their fucking minds. And since they can't lash out on this system, which essentially is supposed to protect humans, and they can't say like what they're doing is necessarily entirely wrong, but it definitely hurts and affects them a lot. Therefore, they can't really attack that organization because of what they're fighting for, but they can't attack the curses that they've been hired to kill in the first place, hence why they act all crazy. I don't know, that's what I really want to say, because I feel like a lot of people give credit towards the villain writing for that, but it really is the hero writing, because the villains that we're seeing isn't necessarily like new. It is refreshing in a sense, because like seeing all that banter and having villains get that much screen time, I would say is kind of a newer thing. You don't really see it that often in other shows. They're kind of just shown in the periphery. I suppose like in order to build up suspense and in order to build up what kind of like powerful being it is that the protagonist has to face. But it's very clear what kind of threat that the curses are, like from the first episode and from all the episodes henceforth. So they don't really need to build up that menacing aura as much for the villains. Therefore, there's more room in order to like humanize them, in order to make them more interesting, in order to make us care. But I'm gonna end the video here because my battery is dead. But thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Follow me on all my medias. They're always linked down below, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye bye.